So this demonstration is how to use watercolour, which is our first palette here, and gouache paint, which is in a larger palette seen here. The main differences between the two is that there's a lot more pigment in the colours in the gouache palette and less in the watercolour. And what that means is you tend to get less colour, less vibrancy with a watercolour. So load your brush with water, and what you can see I'm doing here is I'm activating the paint using the swirling motion, and I've gone for blue to begin with. Now with the brush, you shouldn't ever have paint that goes any more than halfway down the bristles. You're not painting right if that's the case. So even though it's watercolour, depending on your brush, you can still get lines and fine details. Now you might have noticed what I've done then to show a graduation of lightening of the colour is I haven't touched my paint palette again, I've just added a bit more water to my brush. And I'm dragging that colour that I put down on the paper initially down through the water. And we've got quite a good intensity at the top, and then medium tones down to really light at the bottom. Don't overwork a wet page. I might have said this before in other painting demonstrations. The paper will start to rip and bubble. You don't want that. So we've got a good range of tones there. Just swapping colour. If you're going from a dark colour to a light colour like I am here, just make sure you've thoroughly washed your brush. You might even need to change your water. Lots of activating time. Again, the longer you activate, the darker the intensity of the colour. Same technique again. I'm not revisiting the palette, I'm just adding more water. Ideally, you want to use watercolour paper for this. I'm just using normal carbon paper here. Now you can bleed two colours together, and all you do to do that is what I call bridging the gap. So you add paint to the gap, lots of water, and then where the two colours meet with water, they will blend together nicely. Now depending on what two colours you're mixing together, or bleeded out, it's another terminology for this technique, you might get a new colour, because as we know, or we should know, blue and yellow make green, so that's the colour we're bridging with in the middle there. Also, a technique I'm showing you there, if you put a pool of water on your page and add a splash of colour, it gives quite nice effects. These can be used for backgrounds, or maybe to give the illusion of water, if you're doing a waterscape, for example. Moving on to the gouache now then, again, I'll just repeat that you have a lot more intensity and colour with these. Same technique, don't overload your brush with too much water. Always wipe the excess off on the side of the pot and spend your time activating. You don't need to activate quite as long with these because there is more pigment in the colour. They tend to be a lot more expensive for that reason. We can see there, it's a lot richer, more intense colour. The paint really sucks up that water. This also means that it dries quicker, so you can move it around a little less than watercolour. But it depends what effect you're looking for, whether you want an intense, fast drying colour, or you want something that you can move around and play with a bit more. If so, always opt for watercolour. I always find it's harder to achieve lighter colours with the gouache, so I tend to prefer a watercolour, but many prefer gouache. Exactly the same principles as the watercolour, as you can see. They're a little bit harder to bleed together because they dry so fast, as you can see here. If you look at the watercolour example below, those two colours have really bleeded together, or bled together I should say. whereas the gouache, not so much. This is just a tester page, which if it's your first time using either of these, absolutely advise you to do. I'm going to switch videos now to show you how you can use the gouache or watercolour to make something look 3D. So here we have a circle, and I'm going to use the watercolour using the techniques that I've shown you, starting with that really dark intense colour. If you notice, I've got my palm of my hand on the paper at all times. This is really to steady my hand. Now you'll notice I don't touch the paint too often. It's more about adding the water to achieve those lighter tones. So you can see I'm just dragging around and moving around the paint that I put on there to begin with. And we want the centre of this sphere to stay relatively white. And this gives the impression that light is hitting the ball. So relatively quickly, I know that the video is on double speed, but relatively quickly, with relatively low effort, I've turned a circle into a sphere. Have a go. I'm coming to the end of the demonstration now. I hope you found that helpful. My best advice is to set yourselves up with some paper and have a go. Good luck.